The time has come for me to talk about this rap beef. Reacting to stuff isn't really my thing, and I did do my 10-second reviews of the songs that were released, but this is a big deal, it's a big event, and it's something that I knew I had to spend some more time with. At the time of this recording, and hopefully at the time of this release, the dust has kind of settled on all of this, so I don't really expect any more tracks to drop. Then again, who knows, but I wanted to let the tracks breathe and give it some time before I sat down to review this, because yeah, there's a lot to talk about. Now, on the off chance that anybody watching this doesn't know what I'm talking about, there's been a big beef between Kendrick Lamar and Drake, two of the biggest rappers in the world, and two artists of whom I'm a big fan. So it's a very big deal. It's involved a lot of scathing remarks and allegations from both sides, and it's really much bigger than the week or two that this really played out in. In fact, I would say that there are elements of this beef that are decades old, and I'm going to get into that. The way I wanted to approach this is to make something of a definitive video about this beef, because there's a lot to address, and it spans beyond just Drake and Kendrick. So I'm going to try to provide all the context I can as I break these songs down, and I'm going to go a bit non-linear as I describe this story, so bear with me. For now, let's start with a song that kicked off most of this action to begin with. That would be First Person Shooter from Drake.
Go ahead, say it then. Who to go? Who to go?
So First Person Shooter is a song that was on Drake's latest album, For All the Dogs, released towards the end of 2023. And that track features J. Cole, which is a big deal because J. Cole is somebody who's collaborated with Drake before, but it hasn't happened in a long time. And these guys are big names in hip hop. And they discuss that on the song. Content-wise, the song isn't that special, right? It's just two big rap stars getting together and talking about how good at rap they are. J. Cole has a line on here, though, where he's talking about
love when they argue the hardest MC. Is it K-Dot, is it Aubrey or me?
So with that line, J. Cole is recognizing what is broadly referred to in hip-hop right now as the big three. And those big three are Drake, Kendrick Lamar, and J. Cole. Whether you agree with that placement or not isn't really important, because these three guys, they all kind of came up around the same time, early 2010s. Each of them was kind of taken under the wing of some other rapper, in a sense. J. Cole is sort of the Jay-Z prodigy. Drake, of course, came under the wing of Lil Wayne and Birdman with Young Money. And Kendrick Lamar obviously started with TDE and his fellow rappers there, but eventually he signed with Dr. Dre. So each of these guys are kind of co-signed by a big hip-hop legend, and all three of them have achieved a level of success that most rappers don't. So they really do deserve to be considered in a conversation like this. I'm a big fan of Drake and Kendrick. I'm not a very big fan of J. Cole, but I recognize the talent that he has, and he's done a lot of great stuff with his label, and I might not be as big of a fan of the music, but I admit and can't deny the fact that he is a great rapper. And so yeah, on First Person Shooter, obviously J. Cole is having fun that he's doing this big feature with Drake, and he's taking his time to shout out Kendrick Lamar, right? That the big three conversation is alive and well. And this is a big moment because two of the big three are here on a track together. Drake, on the other hand, he approaches this conversation a little differently on the song. So Drake starts getting into this thing about, I'm talking to women, having conversations about who's the GOAT, and I'm asking him. And he has this line, it's a clever line, he says,
like a kid that had bad from January to November, nigga, it's just you and Cole.
The line there, referring to himself and J. Cole, excludes Kendrick Lamar from the conversation. And yeah, as you'll find out, Kendrick Lamar took that personally. Now, in order to understand why Kendrick took this personally, why it took the turn that it did after this, we got to talk about the background of this big three conversation. For this first journey back in time, we're going back to 2013. So in 2013, Kendrick Lamar is coming off of his first big studio debut, Good Kid, Mad City. It performs really well. It's a great album. It's well received. It's doing well on the charts. More important, though, than that album is his verse on a Big Sean song called Control.
I don't smoke crack, motherfucker, I sell it.
The Control features Kendrick Lamar and Jay Electronica, which is crazy to have them on a track, but nobody really remembers or cares about the Jay Electronica verse. What matters here is the Kendrick Lamar verse. So it's essentially like a shot heard around the world in the hip-hop sphere. Kendrick gets on this song and calls himself the King of New York, which is still funny to hear from a guy who's from Compton. He's setting up the song with a sort of little hook in the background of his verse where he's saying, I don't smoke crack, I sell it. Talking about his music being dope. And obviously the status that he's reached, where he's at in his career, he feels like he's on top of the world. So in addition to calling himself the King of the Coast and the King of New York, he announces to all these other rappers, he says, you know what time it is, and he lifts off a bunch of rappers. He lists off J. Cole, Big Crit, Wale, Pusha T, Meek Mill, A$AP Rocky, Drake, Big Sean, Jay Electronica, both on the same song, Tyler the Creator, Mac Miller. And he says, I've got love for all of you, but I'm trying to murder you. obviously not in a literal sense, but he's throwing down the gauntlet. He's saying, look, rap is a competition. You know what time it is. Like, yes, we're all successful, but I'm a competitive guy. This is a competitive sport. I want you to know I think I'm the best. So if anybody wants to say otherwise, now's your chance because I'm on top. It's a bold thing to claim, but you know what? It ignites the fire. I think that, Kendrick is somebody who's very passionate about hip hop, and he wanted that competition, that competitive spirit to thrive. And so all the guys that he mentions on here, at least for the most part, are like, okay, cool. I see what you're trying to do. I respect it. You really are dope. So, bring it on. The competitive spirit's cool. Rest in peace to Mac Miller. He had a really funny response. Kendrick has a line in this verse where he says, I don't want to hear one more noun or verb from you. And Mac Miller said something along the lines of, okay, I'm going to release a song that's all adjectives. But yeah, most of these guys are, cool with it. They're fine with it. And, there's this narrative going around at the time that the real diss is to people who weren't mentioned on the track, because then Kendrick didn't really see you as a peer. It's not like that's accurate. This isn't really a diss in general anyway, but one person kind of took this the wrong way, and that's Drake.
I'm probably like as done as like the rest of the world is with that record. Like I think it came and it went.
So Drake took this the wrong way, I think because he had taken Kendrick on tour, so thought Kendrick was supposed to respect him, I guess. He also gave a feature for Kendrick's album. He was on the track Poetic Justice on Good Kid, Mad City. Interestingly enough, that song was not the big hit on the album. Usually when Drake features on your album, that's the big song, right? For Kendrick, Swimming Pools was his big song off of Good Kid, Mad City. Poetic Justice dropped as a single, but did not perform as well. I feel like that might be part of why Kendrick was like, I don't need Drake. I don't need anybody. I'm the best at this. And so Drake took this as disrespectful, right? Because he's like, hey, I thought this guy's supposed to pay tribute to me. I took him on tour. I'm trying to help put him on, and he says these things like he's gonna kill me. He's not actually gonna kill you, Drake. At least not yet. And so Drake's response is something that happens a lot after this, is just subliminal shots. On his album that drops later in 2013, Nothing Was the Same. I think it's on a track called The Language.
Fuck any nigga that's talking that shit just to get a reaction.
He has these lines about, I don't know why they're lying, but your shit is not that inspiring, right? He's talking about Kendrick's verse and the fact that, Kendrick had to name drop all these people to prove that he's hot or something. It's just subliminal shots. It's nothing direct. He's not really dissing Kendrick, but that's kind of his expression of, yeah, it's kind of weird. I don't really care for that. And Kendrick's response to that song essentially comes in the form of this cypher for BET. All the TDE members get together and rap. Kendrick has an incredible verse on there.
Nothing been the same since they dropped Control and tucked the sense of the rapper back in his pajama clothes.
That's obviously a reference to Drake in a number of ways, that nothing's been the same. Nothing was the same as, a reference to the album title. Drake is notoriously the sensitive rapper, especially back at this time, 2010 through 2013. There were tons of Drake memes about how sensitive he was. We've got our Drake memes now, but they've kind of evolved a little bit. So that was kind of the extent of it, right? They didn't really go to blows for the rest of the next decade. There were subliminal shots back and forth from these guys, nothing really serious, and the sort of thing that you really got to be paying attention to even catch. They're not really name dropping each other. There's just little jabs here and there. Kendrick talking about ghostwriting in the industry, that
But a rapper with a ghostwriter. What the fuck happened?
we all kind of understand to refer to Drake because he was outed for that kind of thing. Again, nothing serious. It's just kind of civil, agree to disagree. You're my peer, but I don't really respect you. We're just going to do our thing. And in that decade that passes, both Kendrick and Drake blow up to great heights. Drake is one of the biggest artists of all time at this point. His charting records, as far as sales, he's reached like pop star levels of success and fame, which is insane. And in my opinion, he's released some great albums since 2013. He's also released some duds, but he's still kind of making good music, which is cool. Meanwhile, Kendrick Lamar from 2013 has released easily his best album, arguably some of his second or third best too. I mean, some fantastic work from him post 2013 as well. And Kendrick has also ascended to prominence, become sort of a household name in that time. Not exactly on pop star levels with Drake, but Kendrick's getting kind of different accolades, right? He's winning a lot of Grammys. He gets a Pulitzer Prize for his album Damn in 2017, which is pretty insane. What we realized in this decade is that these two guys obviously can coexist. What fire might have been there in 2013 obviously didn't ignite the battle that Kendrick wanted when he threw down that gauntlet, challenging anybody like, hey, if you think you're as good as me, step up to the plate. Nobody really did, and that's okay. He kind of took that as, okay, I am the best. No one's really gonna stop me, so I'm just gonna do my thing. And meanwhile, Drake is also the best in his own way. It's more commercial with him. These guys, they have different audiences. They make different kinds of music. Kendrick is obviously making these big artistic statements with his albums. Drake isn't really doing that. He's kind of going more for streaming records and stuff, which, it has cultural impact too. It's just a very different impact than Kendrick Lamar music. But once again, I like both these guys. So overall, I'm happy with the output they've had over that last decade, and I've gotten a lot of great music out of it. First Person Shooter comes out at the end of 2023 on a Drake album that I actually really like. And yeah, things kind of change from there. So now we're back to the present day and what happens. Future and Metro Boomin put out an album called We Don't Trust You earlier this year. Now, each of those guys, I think there's some bad blood that they have with Drake too. I know Metro Boomin was vocal about the fact that Drake was getting Grammy nominated and his album wasn't. Like he's just not really a fan of Drake. I don't know if Future really has beef with Drake necessarily. You know, they've worked together a lot of times. Regardless, this album, it's called We Don't Trust You. I don't know if the album itself is directed at Drake. There's maybe slight jabs here and there that we're going to perceive that way. Very important is the song on this album called Like That. Like That features a verse from Kendrick Lamar, and he's stepping up once again, sort of in the way that he did on Control, and saying, guess what? It's that time again. I'm going to tell you I'm the best. And like, if you're ready to spar with me, let's do this thing. One of the first things he says on his verse on Like That is, okay, let's get it, bro. Drake, you're going to exclude me from that conversation. We can finally get into this. This beef has been simmering on the stove for a decade, but we haven't really done anything about it. Why don't we do something about it? There's a lot of great lines, and I'm going to do this as I kind of go through all these songs to just talk about important lines or lines that I really like. One of the lines he says is, the money, power, respect, the last one is better. When you talk about the big three, I mean, obviously Drake, Kendrick, and J. Cole, not that any of them only have one or two of those three, money, power, and respect, but Kendrick's saying the last one is better. He's talking about respect. The fact that he is well respected for his work, you know, he is well received, critically acclaimed in what he does, and I think he's saying, I don't respect you, Drake. Yeah, you've got money and power, but no one really cares about your music like that. You know, the culture doesn't really respect you. This is going to be a theme in a lot of Kendrick's diss tracks as we go forward, but just kind of isolating Drake, pointing out that Drake is a little separate, a little out of step with the broader culture of hip-hop that doesn't really respect what he's doing in that sense. Kendrick refers to the First Person Shooter song by name. He has a line on there about all your dogs getting buried because the album was for all the dogs. Of course, the big, very direct line that he uses here is,
Motherfuck the big three. Nigga, it's just big me. Nigga, boom.
he's talking about, I don't care what everyone says about me, Drake, and J. Cole, I'm the big one here. It's just like on Control, where he says, I'm the best out. And if you want to prove me otherwise, let's do that. Like, I dare you to try. He says Drake's best album was a light pack, which is fun. And he says Prince outlived Mike Jack, because on First Person Shooter, Drake refers to Michael Jackson and starts saying, beat it, beat it, beat it, because he's talking about beating Michael Jackson's record. This record is for #1 songs. At the time that First Person Shooter drops and this album drops, Drake is one #1 song shy of Michael Jackson's record. He's saying beat it on the song like he's going to beat that record. And guess what? The song First Person Shooter goes #1. So with that, he ties Michael Jackson's record, which is crazy. It's kind of cool to say that on the song that then hits that record. And, you know, Drake, I think, compares himself to Michael Jackson in a lot of songs he refers to. He got a Michael Jackson feature on Scorpion. There's a line on Tootsie Slide that references Michael Jackson. But unlike that, you know, Kendrick's response is Prince outlived Mike Jack. Kendrick's saying, if you're Michael Jackson, I'm Prince, okay? Because he views himself as a different kind of artist, same kind of fame and acclaim, but approaches things a little differently. And yeah, Michael Jackson died before Prince. You know, just playing into that comparison, and I think a cool way. But yeah, that's Like That. And Like That actually goes #1 too, which is really cool to see. That's the #1 song in the country for at least 2 weeks. You know, when you have three big artists, Metro Boomin, Future, and Kendrick on one song, and Kendrick being somebody who hasn't really done a lot of features recently. We haven't heard from him in a couple years. The song goes #1, and it's kind of fun that it's a #1 song and it's throwing shots at Drake. So while this song is going #1, I think Drake is on tour. There's some video out there of him kind of referencing this while he's on tour. Now, before we even get into Drake's response to Like That, I want to briefly touch on J. Cole's. I don't want to get too much into it, but J. Cole drops a surprise mixtape called Might Delete Later, which proves to be very prescient. And there's a song in there called 7 Minute Drill where he starts going at Kendrick Lamar. And I'm not going to look back at this one. The one thing I remember is he starts trying to diss Kendrick's albums, saying,
Your first shit was classic, your last shit was tragic, your second shit
put people to sleep, and they gassed it. He's calling Good Kid, Mad City a classic. Great. I think most people agree with that. I think it's funny to have a diss track where you're telling your guy you're dissing that he made a classic album. And then he says his last one was tragic. That's Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. It is tragic in a sense. I mean, in terms of the content, it is tragic. If J. Cole's just talking about numbers, like, oh, it's tragic, your album didn't sell that much, I don't know. And then your second one, Put People to Sleep and they gassed it. I think he has to be talking about To Pimp a Butterfly, which Yeah, I don't know. Look, me personally, that's one of my favorite albums ever. I think a lot of people are on the same page with that. Granted, there were people that didn't really like it when it came out. And we started hearing a lot from those people after J. Cole dropped this song because they were like, finally time for us to hate on To Pimp a Butterfly again, which you're revealing yourself to be kind of out of touch. It's a deeply layered album, and this diss coming from J. Cole of all people is really funny because you know just from listening to his music how he aspires to be somebody like Kendrick. And if you want to talk about albums putting you to sleep, I actually legitimately fell asleep listening to For Your Eyes Only. I remember that distinctly because I got maybe halfway through, passed out, and then I had to finish it the next day. I think that was sort of, in a way, his like response to Pimp a Butterfly. It was him going for a concept album in that sense. But that one actually did put me to sleep, so we don't need to get into that. But remember, J. Cole on First Person Shooter, he included Kendrick in the conversation, so he really didn't have to address anything. And the disses on this song seem more geared toward Drake than J. Cole. J. Cole's, he's a hip hop purist. Of course, he wants to take that as an opportunity to show off that he can rap, right? We find out later, it's possible that behind the scenes, rumor has it that Schoolboy Q contacted J. Cole and told him, hey man, you probably don't want to do this. Whether it was Schoolboy or not, or Kendrick himself, I don't know. I feel like somebody got in touch with J. Cole some kind of way and said, Kendrick doesn't have any ill will towards you. He respects you. He's fine with you. You want to throw shots and get yourself involved in this? That's up to you. But he does not like this guy Drake, and it's going to get nasty. So if you want to save yourself, now would be the time to back out. And J. Cole did back out in pretty spectacular fashion. He was up on stage performing and took a pause to kind of apologize. And he said, I released this song and it just doesn't feel right. I haven't been sleeping. It's not aligned with who I am. Hey guys, I love Kendrick Lamar. Scream real loud if you love Kendrick too. I'm going to take that song down. And he does. And, everybody clowned him for it because it was like, what a way to lose the beef, apologizing for your track before the guy even responds. I made this joke that he should change his name to USDA Cole because he issued the beef recall. But hindsight is 2020, and by the time we get to the end of this video, you'll understand why I think he did make the right call. This really wasn't his battle, and he kind of catches strays as it goes on, but this is really about Kendrick and Drake, so steer clear. This time around, Drake hears Kendrick Lamar's challenge, and given that he has advanced his rapping quite a bit in recent years, he's ready to accept the challenge. And so a few weeks after Like That drops, Drake actually leaks a track that doesn't really have a name at the time. I want to talk a little bit about that leaking process because I think Drake recognized that Kendrick and Future had a genuine hit on their hands with Like That. And because the charts were really Drake's territory, I think Drake has enough self-awareness to know that if he drops that song right away, it's not going number one. And I think for him, it would be seen as a defeat, at least in his own eyes, if he couldn't outdo their chart performance with that one song. So I think that's part of why he leaked it the way he did. Again, this is just a theory from me, but when Push Ups does finally officially drop, we're about a month out from Like That having released. And Push Ups is a good song. It's got a beat and a sort of flow and rapping style from Drake that I personally am not a huge fan of, but it sounds good. And he's going for closer to a hit type of song than just straight rapping, which again, I know that's Drake's wheelhouse. He does that sort of thing. A lot of great lines on here that I want to get into. The very first, he opens with,
I could never be nobody number one fan. Your first number one.
I had to put it in your hand. This would refer to a few different people. I think arguably Future. I think he gave Future his first number one, but also J. Cole with First Person Shooter. I mean, this is just who Drake is, right? He's a big name. So when he gets on a track, that might be the track to go number one for an artist. Some great shots at Kendrick Lamar. How you big stepping with size 7 men's on. A lot of bars just call him short. They're kind of funny though. He calls him a pipsqueak. You get the idea. It's nothing crazy. Then he gets into stuff about sharing royalties and the splits with the music. I mean, the whole premise of Drop and Give Me 50 is, he's claiming that Kendrick Lamar is kind of beholden to Top Dog, who tells him when to drop, when to do features for other artists and give him 50%. I think the best lines directed at Kendrick on this song are the lines about doing features for Taylor Swift and Maroon 5. Like, hey, they need something. Make sure it's witty. It's like, that to me is really funny because I always found those features to be odd. I think that's like the one point in Kendrick's catalog that you can actually make fun of because his albums are really good and, his songs that he makes on his own are all good. But those features for pop artists, they're kind of odd. But the other thing about Push Ups is that Drake isn't just taking shots at Kendrick. He's taking shots at a lot of different people that have been taking shots at him. He phrases this as, what is this, a 20v1? Because Kendrick is coming at him not just on his own, but with the help of Future and Metro Boomin. And there's an A$AP Rocky verse on the following album that's also directed at Drake. There's stuff with Rick Ross. Drake is in kind of this fun position where he's like, okay, everybody wants to pile on me. Guess what? I'll throw shots at everybody. And that's Push Ups, and it's a good song. I don't know if Drake thinks of himself as Thanos, but a lot of his fans, a lot of people on the internet, Twitter and whatnot, were likening Drake to Thanos. Like, you really have to get the Avengers together to take this guy down. I don't know if those people finished the movie. Maybe they just saw the first one, Infinity War, but in the second movie, they did take down Thanos, so just keep that in mind. Now, if you know anything about Drake, his history, he is kind of a cocky guy, and he's done rap beef before. You know, he's gone toe-to-toe with people before, most notably Meek Mill. With Meek Mill, he sort of invented the concept of going back-to-back on somebody. I don't know if he actually invented it, but he released a second diss track, so it was 2 in a row against Meek Mill, and that second one was called Back-to-Back. So I think it's fair to attribute that concept to him. It's something that has become kind of a Drake signature in a beef like this. With that in mind, what happens after Push Ups? Well, we don't hear from Kendrick right away, so a few days later, Drake drops another track. The second track he drops, it's not officially on streaming. I think it's just dropped on Twitter. I don't know if it was on Instagram, but it was definitely dropped on Twitter. And it's called Tailor Made Freestyle. There's quite a bit to talk about here. First of all, the title itself, I think, is a great triple entendre. First things first, the track itself is tailor-made to Kendrick, right? Where Push Ups was going at all these people in the 20v1. Tailor Made is only going at Kendrick. The other two meanings here have to do with Taylor Swift, right? The first is that Drake is alleging on this song that the reason Kendrick is not dropping anything is because Taylor just released her album, The Tortured Poets Department, which it's her worst album. You can go watch my reviews on that if you want. The idea here is she just dropped that album. She's got all this chart territory, and he's saying that Top Dog and whatever powers that be have decided that Kendrick is not allowed to respond until Taylor Swift has her moment. So in that sense, he's saying that Taylor made your schedule and you can't release until she gives you permission. I don't know how true that is. I have no idea. It doesn't sound that true to me. To the extent it might be true, would have something to do with the fact that Kendrick and Taylor Swift have worked together. And that gets me to the third meaning here. Drake is obviously somebody who charts mean a lot to, right? Like that going #1. He talks about push-ups, you know, putting your first #1 in your hands. Who gave Kendrick his first #1? Taylor Swift. To the extent that Drake considers somebody getting to the top of the charts as having made it, he's referring to the fact that Kendrick is tailor-made, right? That his first #1 was the result of Taylor Swift. So the song itself is pretty interesting. There was this whole thing going around where fake tracks from Kendrick and Drake were kind of releasing on social media, and most of us could listen to it very easily and be like, oh, that's AI, that's not real. And so on this song from Drake, he uses AI to make his voice sound like Tupac and Snoop Dogg, two West Coast hip-hop legends that Kendrick obviously looks up to. Fun fact, both of those guys were featured on Kendrick's To Pimp a Butterfly. So there's obviously a connection there.
Once upon a time in the city so divine called the ground is gonna open up and swallow the evil.
This first verse, which is done with Tupac's voice, I laugh at the way he starts it because he says,
Kendrick, we need ya, the West Coast savior.
In Tupac's voice, which it's just funny to hear. It's goofy. The use of AI, I don't really want to get into that. I don't approve of it, and the song is ultimately taken down because of this. I get what Drake was going for, and it is creative, despite the fact that he used AI to do it. He could have done a better job making his raps sound like them, and it would have been funny to just hear Drake try to do their voice, but he used AI, so the song is now gone. But yeah, the Tupac verse is, you know, he's kind of pleading for Kendrick to respond. And he even says, hey, mention the fact that he likes little girls. I heard that on the Joe Budden podcast. That bar is not going to age well. And then the Snoop Dogg verse comes in saying,
That's you. What the fuck you really got to do?
It's like those intro lines for both verses, they just make me laugh because they're funny. Snoop, which is really Drake, references the passing the torch to Kendrick at the House of Blues, which is a big thing that happened.
Nigga, you got the torch, nigga. You better run with that.
Kendrick was sort of honored on stage by these West Coast legends as like the future of West Coast hip hop. And yeah, he obviously looks up to guys like Snoop and Tupac, and that's why Drake chose to use their voices here to kind of piss Kendrick off, which, you know, we'll find out that he definitely does. But the end of this track is actually one of my favorite verses from Drake in this beef. It did not age well either, but he's just kind of poking and prodding at Kendrick, saying, why haven't you dropped yet? Like, we're waiting on you. Why aren't you in the booth? He says, you know, maybe you're waiting for this to die down, but
Nah, not this time, nigga. You following through.
he's trying to put Kendrick on the clock, which I understand. And, you know, it's like he's going back to back here, and there's a couple jabs. It's not a lot of new stuff in terms of making fun of or dissing Kendrick, but just kind of saying, hey, my track took me like an hour. Where is yours? Yeah, as you'll see, this strategy did not work for him, because during this time, Kendrick was in the booth, and what he was doing in the booth was much more diabolical. So after Drake drops Tailor-Made Freestyle and goes back to back on Kendrick, there's a span of maybe a week or two where we don't hear anything. I'll admit to it myself, and I feel like there were a lot of people feeling like, is Kendrick going to respond? Like, is this rapper that we all know and love, is he actually not coming with anything? Is it possible that he threw those shots on like that and didn't really mean for a true beef to kick off? People are out here talking about the fact that, yeah, Kendrick is one of the best, but is he battle tested? You know, we don't really know how he fares into beef. This is Drake's territory. Now, granted, I know it's not like we need to have these things on a time frame. The beefs of the past, it wasn't like people were dropping songs within days of each other, but you know, we're in the 21st century here. This is kind of how things work, with Drake being the guy going back to back on people. And it was like, are we going to hear anything? And then we did.
Euphoria.
So Kendrick drops a song called Euphoria. Before I even get into the song Euphoria, we got to talk about the title, because the cover art that Kendrick uses has this sort of dictionary definition and some other hints at kind of how he's going to play things out in this beef. But to me, the most important thing is that Drake was an executive producer on the show Euphoria. If you don't know about it, Euphoria is a show that largely centers on teenagers and high schoolers engaging in a lot of adult activities, including sex. And well, as we heard Drake trying to kind of get ahead of the allegations that he likes young girls, Kendrick doesn't really get into that on this song, but I feel like the title is just letting Drake know, yeah, I'm aware of that. We're going to get into that later. The energy that he comes in with is a lot different. Kendrick is in contemplative mode, which is very interesting to see. And if you're in a beef like this and one of the guys comes in extremely calm, I think you should be worried. I'm going to be stuck on Euphoria for a while, and it's also going to trigger another flashback, but let's just dive right into a few of these. So just in this opening contemplative section, he has some lines about predicting the angle that Drake's going to take, and he says,
Fabricating stories on the family front, cause you heard Mr. Morale.
That line's going to prove itself in just a few tracks as he kind of calls things right. This is the song where Kendrick first calls Drake a master manipulator. I think that's a term that he learned in therapy. If you're a fan of Kendrick, you'd understand that his last album, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, was kind of him chronicling his journey through therapy. And the fact that he's using terms like master manipulator tells me that he paid attention, right? He's a guy who took that seriously, that process. As you're going to see as we go through these diss tracks, he's somebody that feels this internal conflict of like knowing what's the right thing to do and wanting to be the bigger person, but recognizing that this is hip hop, and if I don't get my hands dirty here, I can't really live with myself. So I'm going to have to embrace that darker side of myself and just go in on Drake. He tells Drake, you're not a rap artist, you're a scam artist with hopes of being accepted. Tommy Hilfiger stood out, but FUBU never had been your collection. This is a common theme that Kendrick takes to Drake a lot through this process. He's not the first to do it, but this idea that Drake is an outsider in hip hop, he's not really accepted in the way that an artist like Kendrick Lamar is. And the comparison there with Tommy Hilfiger versus FUBU, you know, Tommy Hilfiger is just like this big money brand that you might associate with somebody like Drake, but FUBU is a black-owned business. You know, the initialism stands for us, by us, and the concept of us versus you is also going to play out a lot in this beef. Kendrick is trying to draw the lines that he represents hip-hop culture and Drake does not. There's a lot of things that are said on these diss tracks, but to me, I think that that is one of the most critical, and it's something that Drake doesn't address really. He has kind of touched on it in the past. I like to note this line on Diplomatic Immunity where he says,
Black excellence, but I guess when it comes to me, it's not the same, no.
all goody, that just means I'll do the things we all couldn't, which is, I feel like, the closest that he's gotten to addressing that divide between himself and the culture of hip-hop. That's a big point that Kendrick's going to keep hammering on in this beef, and Drake doesn't really have a response to it. I mean, what is he going to say? Because Kendrick's kind of got a point. Drake is a bit of an outsider, not just because he's Canadian, you know, because he's ascended to this pop star level and he makes music where his competition is people like Taylor Swift, or when you look at the records, you know, it's like he's competing again with Michael Jackson, the Beatles, big, huge pop artists. That's his territory at this point. He's not really in the culture of hip hop in the way that a lot of these other people are. And Kendrick Lamar, again, when he talked about money, power, respect, the last one is better. That's what Kendrick has that Drake doesn't. There's a great line in here, and I'm going to read this to make sure I have this right. The very first time I shot me a Drake, and that, of course, he's not talking about literally shooting Drake, but a Draco.
The homie had told me to aim it this way. I didn't point down enough.
Today, I'll show you I learned from those mistakes. In a literal sense, he's telling about the first time he used a gun. His advisor in that situation telling him, you know, kind of aim it down because the recoil is going to shoot up a little bit. Leaving that literal sense aside, it's like, yeah, I've taken shots at Drake before. I didn't aim low enough. It kind of grazed him and didn't really go for the head in the way that it should, you know, but I've learned from those mistakes. So today we're going in. You'll see in the title of my video, I mentioned this as a family feud. And one of the first lines where this comes up on the song is Kendrick says, his daddy a killer, he wanna be Junior. He's talking about not Drake's literal dad, but functionally sort of the dad on Young Money label that signed him to begin with, which is Birdman. It was Birdman and Lil Wayne, and then Drake kind of came on under them. And Birdman is kind of functionally Lil Wayne's dad in a sense too. Again, not literally his father, but he kind of took Lil Wayne under his wing when he was a kid, right? He was like 13, 14 years old or something, and eventually signed to his label. There's kind of been like that father-son dynamic with them too. Drake obviously is always somebody searching for that street cred and wanting to appear to be a killer like his dad on the label. I don't know if Birdman actually killed anybody. Lil Wayne's obviously got the teardrop tattoo. I don't know if he literally killed anybody either, but that's what they would suggest. And Drake is not that kind of guy, but he wants to be. But we're going to get back to this family feud stuff in a minute. There's a line where Kendrick says, somebody told me you got a ring. I'm ready to double the wage.
I'd rather do that than let a Canadian nickel make Pac turn in his grave.
There's a lot going on here. The ring references to the fact that Drake at one point bought Tupac's ring and has that. Obviously, he used the AI to sound like Tupac on Taylor Made Freestyle, and Kendrick's like, you're making Tupac turn in his grave with the disrespect here, right? Because Drake buys up this rap memorabilia. I'm going to talk about this too later, that's come up in his career as well. I don't know if he's trying to memorialize hip hop, this culture that he is a part of but isn't a part of, and he just buys up rap memorabilia. I don't know if it's just a hobby of his. Kendrick also says, there's 3 GOATs left. I see 2 of them kissing and hugging on stage. He's talking about Drake and J. Cole, who have had this touring relationship recently, and working together. And Kendrick says, Cole and Aubrey know I'm selfish. The crown is heavy.
I pray they my real friends. If not, YNW Melly.
YNW Melly is another rapper who I believe is in prison at this point for killing one of his friends. He has a song kind of about that with Murder on My Mind. Kendrick's like, I pray they're my real friends. If not, I might literally kill them. I wouldn't take any of this too seriously, but I love that connection there. The next few lines that come up on this song trigger another flashback, so bear with me, please, because this is going to be quite the detour. Kendrick says, I don't like you popping shit at Pharrell. For him, I inherit the beef. Says, fuck all that pushing P. Let me see you push a T. You better off spinning again on him. You think about pushing me.
He's Terrence Thornton. I'm Terrence Crawford. Yeah, I'm whooping feet.
Just those are some of my favorite lines on here, but this is where we really get into the family feud of hip hop. The stuff with Pharrell, I can't remember if there were any specific disses thrown at Pharrell from Drake, but Drake notoriously bought some of Pharrell's old jewelry.
I melt down the chains that I bought from your boss. Give a fuck about all of that.
And again, it's part of this rap memorabilia. To me, again, it plays into this whole idea of him being Thanos. So these are sort of like the infinity stones of rap that he's collecting, where it's Tupac's ring, Pharrell's jewelry, and the next one that we'll talk about is a microphone signed by Pusha T and maybe his brother as well. They, of course, were in the rap duo Clips. And when we talk about Clips, and I talked a little bit about Birdman, this is where we really have to get into the family feud that sits at the bottom of all of this.
What happened to that boy? Yeah.
So this flashback is going to take us to Virginia in the early 2000s. There's a rap duo called Clips, and that is 2 brothers, Terrence Thornton, and I don't remember his brother's name, but Pusha T and Malice, that's the duo of Clips, right? Great rap duo, responsible for tracks like Grindin' that everybody knows. One of their most frequent collaborators as a producer is Pharrell Williams, but really Pharrell is half of the duo The Neptunes, him and Chad Hugo. The Neptunes are responsible for a lot of the great production that elevates Clips to the status that they achieve. They're all from Virginia, so they're all great friends, and it's kind of like a little family down there, a literal family between Pusha T and Malice. They are brothers. I mean, this is a core sort of Virginia family that they have. I talked about Young Money being sort of another family. So early 2000s, Birdman gets Clips on a song, and it's produced by the Neptunes. The song is called What Happened to That Boy. It's a great song. Go listen to it if you haven't heard it. Pusha T's verse on that song especially is awesome. This song triggered a lot of beef because the rumor is that Birdman and his associates, whoever would be responsible, did not pay the Neptunes for their beat. Essentially, Pharrell never got paid for that. I'm not sure if Clips got paid for their feature, whatever. Somebody didn't get paid in that transaction. And that has been sort of a sore point ever since. Not too long after that is, around the time when Lil Wayne starts coming up and he's taken under Birdman's wing. That's a bit of a pun there because he's Birdman. But Wayne is sort of Birdman's prodigy. There's this other thing that happens in the early 2000s where Lil Wayne is featured on a magazine cover wearing a Bathing Ape hoodie. A Bathing Ape is a designer brand founded by a Japanese designer named Nigo. And Nigo is a friend of and collaborator with Pharrell Williams. Again, looping back into this whole family idea. I feel like, Clips and Pharrell were the guys first trying to popularize the Bathing Ape brand in the United States. And to see Lil Wayne put it on in a magazine and sort of start to get credit for popularizing that brand, again, Pharrell and Clips, they take this some kind of way because, this is another extension of that family feud. There's a song that Clips puts out on Hell Hath No Fury called Mr. Me Too that is sort of a subliminal but direct, not quite indirect diss of Lil Wayne.
Yeah, you too. I know. Yep. Yeah, you too.
Clips is out here wearing Bathing Ape. They're kind of the first to do that, but then Lil Wayne is, so do I. And they're just kind of, poking fun at the fact that he's just stealing their style. But yeah, so the beef deepens just a little more there. So then Malice steps away from rap, Clips sort of disbands, and we're left with Pusha T, who starts his solo career, in my opinion, extremely effective. I mean, he's a fantastic rapper. Pusha T starts out with these mixtapes, and there's a song he puts out called Exodus 23-1, and this is a big diss track.
Beef is when you hide behind them other niggas, but they ain't killers, they ain't pulling them triggers.
It's aimed sort of at Lil Wayne and Birdman. It's a great diss track if you haven't heard it, listen to it, but he kind of gets into this whole thing about the money splits going on at Young Money, how, you're signed to this guy, who's signed to this guy, signed to this guy. Kendrick actually uses that line almost exactly on Euphoria as well.
You signed to one nigga that signed to another nigga that signed.
You assigned to a nigga that signed to a nigga that said he was signed to that nigga.
So when he says he's inheriting the beef, he means that in more senses than just, I'll take up for Pharrell. It's interesting because on Pusha T's debut album, he has a song called Nostalgia featuring Kendrick Lamar. One of the great collaborations, in my opinion, of the last decade. Kendrick's verse on there, there's stuff in there that kind of, has nothing to do with this beef, but I want to talk about it because some of it does kind of become relevant. He starts his verse by saying,
You wanna see a dead body?
Stuff that comes up on all these songs here in this beef. I see dead people, just references like that. But the other thing that's interesting on Nostalgia, his whole verse there is talking about how his verses are bricks, right? That he is essentially a dope dealer because he makes dope music. That, of course, ties into his verse on Control, where he said, I don't smoke crack, I sell it. There's a line near the end of Nostalgia where he's saying,
Now reap what you sowed, nigga. Please reap what you sowed, nigga.
And of course, early on in Euphoria, he says,
I ain't thinking about no reaper, nigga, I'm reaping what I sow, okay?
This idea of reaping what he's sown takes us, again, back to Control. That's where Kendrick sort of laid the groundwork of what this beef initially was. Him calling out every other rapper and saying, if you think you're as good as me, let's do this. One of the people he mentioned on Control, I mentioned it before, but Pusha T. Now, why mention Pusha T again on Euphoria? Well, that's another beef that we have to talk about. Starting with that Exodus 23-1, there were always sort of, again, subliminal shots between Drake and Pusha T. Obviously, Pusha T still had this beef outstanding with the Young Money crew because of the fact that Birdman never paid Pharrell and the Neptunes. And yeah, he doesn't like Drake. He just doesn't. I don't think he respects him. I don't think he likes him. It kind of comes to a head in 2018 when Pusha T drops the track Infrared, where he takes pretty direct shots at Drake. One of the early lines on Infrared, he says, it was written like Nas, but it came from Quentin. That, of course, is a reference to, again, these ghostwriting allegations that have been around with Drake for a while. Some of his hits were at least co-written by someone named Quentin Miller. It's interesting. This is one of those areas where, again, Drake is sort of outside the boundaries of hip-hop and more so into pop music. Because in pop music, everybody writes each other's stuff. It's really not a big deal at all. I mean, most pop artists don't really write their own hits. They have these frequent pop hit writers that a lot of them are like Scandinavian or whatever. They just write songs for everybody. From a hip-hop perspective, from rap purists' standpoint, it's unacceptable to have somebody else write your stuff for you. Again, this is a reason why Pusha T does not respect him. And, he talks about the Grammys and how he's not going to get up on stage and tap dance for the white powers. Grammy's a racist institution. We know this. I talk about that all the time. Drake is somebody that does get Grammys, and I don't think it bothers Pusha T, but he's like, I don't really care about that at all. It's not my field.
Believe in myself, in the Coles and Kendricks, let the sock puppets play.
But yeah, these are thinly veiled shots at Drake, and Drake responds to Infrared within days with the song Duppy Freestyle. W Freestyle is actually a great diss song, and I think one of the best that Drake has ever done. He's very energized. He's talking about a lot of different stuff. He actually references the microphone that he bought from Pusha T, talking about,
I had a microphone of yours, but then the signature faded.
and that kind of reflects reality. It's kind of an interesting diss because it's like, at the end of the day, you did buy a microphone signed by this guy that you're beefing with, right? Like, that says a lot about his pedigree in hip-hop. Drake makes the claim that Pusha T is not even top 5 as far as his label talent goes, which, again, hard claim to make when somewhere on a shelf in your home is a microphone signed by this guy that you paid for. So Drake makes a mistake. Again, it's a great song. I think it's a mistake. I think most of us would agree. By mentioning Pusha T's fiance by name. He says,
I'ma let it ring on you like Virginia Williams.
not a good idea. Pusha T is, he's kind of a scary guy. I don't know. If I were a rapper, there's certain rappers that I wouldn't really test. I think Pusha T is one of those. Drake's like, whatever, I'm going to, throw everything I have at the wall, talk about the fact that he didn't really actually sell drugs. The line he says is, someone says, it was your brother, your cousin, and then you. You don't rap about what you did, you rap about what you knew, which is, I mean, I guess I get where you're coming from, but a lot of Drake's rapping about mob ties or gang activity, whatever it is, it's not stuff that he's doing, it's stuff that he knows or like his associates. I think he's throwing that, trying to hurt Pusha T and saying, you're not actually a drug dealer, you just like to pretend you were. But yeah, I think name dropping Virginia Williams was a bad idea because a few days after Duppy, Pusha T drops the story of Adidon.
Easy money.
Oh boy, story of Adidon. I still remember listening to this one for the first time. There's so many elements here that have to be talked about. First of all, the cover art for the single is a picture of Drake in blackface, which is real. It was for a photo shoot he was doing. And the beat of the song is the Story of OJ beat from Jay-Z's last album. It flips a sample of Nina Simone. And that plays into the theme of the song because Pusha T is questioning Drake's issues about his own identity. But Pusha T starts this off by saying, drug dealing aside, ghostwriting aside, let's have a heart-to-heart about your pride. There's so much that I love about this disc. It's really one of the greatest of all time. I think once the dust has all settled with this Kendrick stuff, I still think Story of Adidon is one of the greats. It's almost like I could go through every line of the song, but he says, even though you're multi, I see that your soul don't look alive. The M's count different when Baby divides the pie. Again, referring to the Young Money, the money splits there. Baby is another nickname for Birdman. He says some things about Drake's parents and the fact that Drake's dad abandoned him. And he says, since you name drop my fiance, let him know who you chose as your Beyonce. I think her Instagram handle was Sophie Knows Better, some supposed porn star that it's not like Drake is engaged to her, but newsflash, Drake has a child with this woman. And Pusha T doesn't just announce that he has a child, he knows the child's name, Adonis. Adonis is your son, and he deserves more than an Adidas press run. So I think Pusha T might have known from behind the scenes or heard somewhere that Drake was going to maybe getting ready to announce the fact that he had a son and do it as part of this Adidas press run. So he completely deflates that. Just scathing lines from him. He says,
You are hiding a child. Let that boy come home. Deadbeat motherfucker.
Playing Border Patrol. It's just, very mean, but also very catchy. Pusha T raps like a sniper, and it's like every shot from him does serious damage. He's sitting Drake down like he's a psychiatrist. I feel like Pusha T is like the Joker. He's kind of psychotic. I don't even care about your ghostwriting anymore. I don't care about any of this stuff. I just want to sit you down and talk to you. And then he also gets into the fact that Drake's producer 40 has MS, and he's saying, tick, 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 how much time that man got. He's sick. And it's like, very unnecessary shots. I don't know what to say. Is it appropriate? But yeah, Pusha T goes there. What's crazy about this track is towards the end, Pusha T is saying, this is Surgical Summer Volume 1. You can tell he's just ready. He's like, okay, like you want to turn this into back and forth? We can do that.
A little fight now. I like that.
Drake does not respond. The official claim is that Drake wrote a diss that was it was over the top, and Jay Prince, some other Young Money label head guy, told him not to release it, like it would be a bad strategy. I feel like that's bogus. I don't know if Drake actually wrote anything. I don't know what he had, but it doesn't really matter. Pusha T absolutely dominated this beef and exposed vulnerability in Drake's armor. The fact that he was, I think, already gearing up to announce his son to the world and make him a part of his life, and there's, songs about Adonis starting on his next album. I feel like Drake was maybe already moving in that direction, but for the rest of time, anytime Drake does anything with his son, somebody in the comments is going to be talking about how Pusha T bullied him into becoming a better father. And that is a crazy legacy to have come out of that beef.
Quit your yapping before I get the clapping and have your body parts mix and matching.
That is the status of the beef between Pharrell, Clips, the Neptunes, and Young Money. Pusha T carried that torch. He went at Drake. They traded bars in that beef. Drake very handily lost by not even responding to one of the most scathing diss tracks ever. That's why Kendrick says,
Let me see you push a T. You better off spinning again on him.
if you think about pushing me, it's like, hey, you never even responded to Push a T, so maybe you should think about going back to that before you decide to test me, buddy. So yeah, now we're back to Euphoria, and Kendrick talks about, I'm the biggest hater. I'm the biggest Drake hater. I hate the way that you walk, the way that you talk. I hate the way that you dress.
The way you walk, that's me. The way you talk.
It's petty stuff, but it's just funny to hear him say. Because again, we know this guy is like somebody who has been through therapy, and he's made a big deal about that. There's the contrast between him saying how much he hates Drake and saying, I still love when you see success. You know, everything with me is blessed. Keep making me dance, waving my hand. There won't be no threats. I like Drake with the melodies. I don't like Drake when he acts tough. I love that from Kendrick, that he is somebody that has that duality, that he's like, I do still have love for Drake. I respect the lane that he's in, but if he wants to come into my lane, it's not going to go well for him. And again, going back to this idea of Drake being separate from the culture, Kendrick says,
Didn't notice I said we. It's not just me. I'm what the culture feeling.
Kendrick feels that he is somebody that can capture the culture and say things on behalf of hip-hop culture, and he just feels that Drake can't. Again, it's like you versus us. This is us. This is what we're feeling. You wouldn't understand that because you're not really a part of it. He gets into some of the same stuff that Pusha T did with Drake's identity. There's another great set of lines where he says,
Yeah, my first one like my last one. It's a classic. You don't have one.
Let your core audience stomach that and then tell them where you get your abs from. This is getting into this sort of allegation that's been behind the scenes for a few years, that Drake had some sort of surgery to give him abs. Rick Ross has called him BBL Drizzy, and that's also taken on its own thing with Metro Boomin's Diss Beat, which I could talk about a little later too. Yeah, this idea that Drake cut corners to look a certain way. Some sort of cosmetic surgery to, maybe it was liposuction, maybe it was, I don't know if it's literally a BBL, I think that's just a joke, but Kendrick references a V12, which I think is a machine that's used to remove fat in a situation like that. So again, it's very elaborate stuff here. I feel like I'm talking a lot about this track, and it is a 6-minute song, so there's a lot to talk about, but just a few more things that I really have to touch on. Kendrick also flips the 20v1 narrative and says, this ain't a 20v1, it's a 1v20 if I have to smack the people that write with you. Bringing back the ghostwriting stuff that he doesn't know who's really responsible for anything that Drake does at this point. There's so many little things that I could talk about here. Another one, he mentioned the New Ho King restaurant. Apparently this is a Chinese restaurant that Drake was robbed at, which is kind of crazy, but just referencing that here just to kind of flex and scare him. Another simple but effective line on this song is where Kendrick says,
I'm knowing they call you the boy, but where's the man? Cause I ain't seen him yet.
I like using that term, the boy, here because it reminds me of that song that kicked off this generational beef with what happened to that boy. And really the last thing that I have to mention on here is that Kendrick is talking about, you issued a cease and desist for the Like That record. You didn't like that record? But then he says, back to back, I like that record. I'm gonna get back to that for the record. What does he do after this song drops? Well, he drops another song. It's his turn to go back to back. So the next song Kendrick drops is called 616 in LA. The title is obviously a play on Drake's timestamp series, where he does all these different timestamps in different cities across the globe. Kendrick's obviously is in LA because he's from LA, but that 616, there's a lot of different references at play with that one. Some people point to different Bible verses that might implicate, or stuff involving the O.J. Simpson trial. To me, I think the most important one is that 616 is Father's Day this year. There's talk throughout this about Drake being an absent father, or his father being absent in his life. So I think it was perfectly set up that if this thing really drags out, Father's Day is going to be interesting. This is a short song and it's only released on Instagram, but it's a really cool song. Again, sonically really interesting, and the approach Kendrick is taking on this one is, I feel like he knows he shouldn't be doing this, that he's kind of above beefing with artists because he's got the acclaim, he's got everything he wants to have achieved as a rapper. But the line on here that really sticks with me is when he says, God, my confession is yours, but who am I if I don't go to war?
There's opportunity when living with loss. I discover myself would not fall short.
Look, I know I'm a better man than this, but I have to go to war here, right? This is essentially my calling, and I'm going to learn a lot about myself by reaching my lowest point, which you could argue he does. He goes to some pretty dark places, as we're going to see. The other thing he does with this song is he talks about the fact that OVO might be working for him, that Drake's got moles inside his camp that are leaking information to him. That's going to become sort of a disputed issue as we go, but it's a great tactic to just try to instill paranoia in your opponent. Drake being somebody that talks about mob ties and wants to posture himself as some sort of mob leader, when you've got moles in your operation, you're obviously not good at what you're doing. He's got a line in here who says,
Fake bully, I hate bullies. You must be a terrible person.
I don't know why, but just calling somebody a terrible person, I feel like that's a hard enough diss that I would be like, look, I can't do this anymore. That's just, it's not even necessarily creative or interesting. It's just very to the point. Drake, you're a terrible person. That's such a harsh thing to say. I like that line. The last thing I want to touch on with this track is he references Zach Bia and Twitter bots, saying that Drake plays nerdy with these different tactics and he can't hide his reality behind Wi-Fi. As we know, Drake is, throughout this beef, he's just kind of posting memes as he waits for Kendrick to respond, which he's done that before and it was kind of successful, like in the exchange with Meek Mill back in the day. But in this exchange, it doesn't come off as confidence as much as hubris, this idea that he really should be taking this more seriously. He's posting these clips from like God of War and Denzel Washington movies and stuff. The context for some of these is not good. It's like, you know, the person ultimately realizes their mistakes or something. I'm glad that Kendrick pointed out the meme stuff because he's not like that. You know, to bring back a quote from Young Thug about James Harden, he don't got internet. Kendrick's not really on the internet posting like that. He's not trying to win this war on that front. He's trying to win it with raps. And ultimately, yeah, that's what he's going to do. So it's not too long after 616 that Drake does respond. There's been this talk from guys like DJ Academics, who kind of works as a mouthpiece for Drake. The relationship there is strange to me, but there's all this talk about how Drake has a red button that he's going to push. Drake himself was posting memes about a red button too, which to the extent there is a red button, I think Family Matters is that red button. And actually, before we get into Family Matters proper, I have to talk about the sort of lost song, the lost interlude in this exchange that I don't really see anybody covering or talking about.
Looking in the mirror, still embarrassed. Stop talking, how you doing?
So when Drake drops Family Matters, he drops a post about it on Instagram, and that post features another song. That song is a flip of the Buried Alive interlude from Take Care. If you remember that track on Take Care, Buried Alive, it was done by Kendrick. Kendrick was on that album. This brief interlude where Kendrick kind of sings at the beginning and then, you know, raps a little bit. And Drake emulates the singing and the rapping and flow really well. He does a pretty good Kendrick Lamar impression singing,
If you in a pine box,
I will shovel dirt on top. I have to point it out because I think it's funny. I think it's a good job by Drake. I was just thinking about it in this beef that when you have artists who've worked together in the past, I feel like it would be really cool if they flipped each other's music. It's a Kendrick feature on Drake's song. I think Drake has a little license to mess with that. I don't know if Kendrick would be interested in flipping Poetic Justice in some way, but I feel like that is a cool tactic. And unfortunately, yeah, this song is lost in the shuffle for more than one reason. The first reason is because it is just sort of an interlude preceding Family Matters. When Drake drops Family Matters, the first thing to note is that he drops it with a music video. That in itself indicates that he really put a lot of effort into this. And I gotta say, the music video is great. This song itself has 3 different beats. It's sort of a, you know, the 3 switch aspect, you know, and it's also 6 minutes long, just like Euphoria was. So it's really coming for Kendrick in this one. The first third of this song and music video, the video itself is picking up a van that looks like the van on the cover of Good Kid, Mad City and taking it to a junkyard and putting it in a car crusher. That in itself, that whole premise, it goes hard. I think it's cool. He kind of hinted at the music at the end of Push-Ups. There was kind of a sneak preview of what this was going to sound like. So he uses that scheme on this first beat. He talks about people that really gangbang, like YG or Chris Brown. Just asserting that Kendrick is not really gang affiliated, which he kind of is. There's some really interesting lines in this first verse. He says,
always rapping like you about to get the slaves free,
but that ultimately he's a fake activist and doesn't go back to his hood and plant money trees. Hearing Drake talk about slaves, it's always kind of strange to me. He did that on Slime You Out as well, where he said,
whipped and changed you like American slave.
That line in particular, I think, is even more troubling because when he has to distinguish American slaves, it reminds you that this guy is Canadian, and trying to use that against somebody like Kendrick Lamar in a rap battle, it's not a great look. You know, he brings up the fact that Kendrick said he hated the women that Drake is with, but Drake says, what about the women that you're with? And then talking about hitting up Vanilla Cream when you need help with your self-esteem. These are good lines, don't get me wrong. That Vanilla Cream stuff, he's obviously talking about white women, and that's something that Kendrick already admitted to on Mr. Morale. On Worldwide Steppers, he talks about the fact that he thinks he's racist because he would have sex with white women as honestly sort of retribution for slavery. It's a very dark song. I think prior to this beef, that was one of the darkest songs I've ever heard from Kendrick. But again, fair game for Drake to bring up. He talks a lot about Kendrick and his son and Kendrick's fiance Whitney, the relationship they have, and he makes the suggestion that one of Kendrick's kids might be Dave Freeze. Dave Freeze is Kendrick's manager. This is, again, it's unsubstantiated in the way Drake says it. He said, I heard
that one of them little kids might be Dave Freeze.
So he doesn't even say it with that much confidence, but you know, it's a tough suggestion to make. He also does some more jokes about Kendrick being short, which I know it's like schoolyard stuff, but they do kind of make me laugh. He says something about Kendrick always said I overlooked him, I was staring straight.
These bars go over Kenny head no matter what I say.
So then the second verse on this song, the second beat, Drake goes back to this narrative of the 1v20 where he's throwing shots at Rick Ross, who actually did have a pretty funny Drake diss that he put out. Called Drake BBL Drizzy, said he got a nose job, and was just calling him white boy over and over. It's nothing very insightful, but it's funny, and the cover art for it is extremely funny. It's just, I don't know what to do with that one. But yeah, so he's throwing shots at Rick Ross, and I think those are some of the better lines on here where he says,
Body at the fucking body, and you know Rick reading my Miranda rights.
Rick Ross used to be a correctional officer. That's a great line too. I'm giving Drake credit where he deserves it. He's got some funny lines. But yeah, throughout this verse, he's kind of throwing shots at A$AP Rocky, who also responded on one of the future Metro Boomin albums. Some more shots at The Weeknd, Metro Boomin. It's fine, but I feel like at this point in the beef, he should have just been focusing on Kendrick. The beat on this second one is great, but we've identified the main threat. We need to address that one. And thankfully on the third verse, he does bring the focus back to Kendrick. Man, the beat that he uses on the third verse is awesome. One of my favorites in this whole exchange. Really, really cool. And in the music video for it, he's actually sitting and hanging out at that New Ho King restaurant. The jewelry that he bought from Pharrell, he's got the owner wearing it. He's showing off some of that rap memorabilia that he has, and then there's clips of him, I think, hanging out in LA, just proving like I can do whatever I want. I think on the visuals front, Drake did a really good job with this. But the extent of that effort is also what suggests to me that this was his red button. Anyway, the line that he opens this third verse with is probably my favorite on the whole track. He said,
Kendrick just opened his mouth. Someone go hand him a Grammy right now.
That's, it's good. It's funny to be dissing Kendrick about the fact that he's maybe got too many accolades in Drake's opinion. Actually, to Drake's credit, he is somebody that has spoken out against the Grammys before, and I appreciate that about him. But yeah, he might be a little bitter about the fact that no matter what Kendrick does, it's well received, whereas Drake stuff, well, it really isn't. I mean, if he wanted that acclaim, he could do better, right? The next line of this verse is actually great too. He says,
Where's your uncle at? Cause I wanna talk to the man in the house.
Now this is obviously poking fun at Kendrick's song Auntie Diaries, where he talks about his auntie who transitioned to a man. I feel like Drake's line here is maybe the first good joke I've seen about that song that isn't transphobic. I mean, Drake is recognizing that the relative has transitioned to a man, and he's just saying that Kendrick is less of a man than his uncle. He suggests that Kendrick was the one who called the Tupac estate and asked them to get the Drake song Take It Down. Don't know if that's true. Could be. Who knows? He also says,
You wanna take off a Pharrell and come get his legacy out of my house.
He owns those chains. He bought them. And again, playing into this, you know, well, the song is called Family Matters, and I'm calling this whole thing a big family feud. He says, your daddy got robbed by Top. You Stunna and Wayne like father, like son. There's a song on Damn called Duckworth where Kendrick details the story of his dad who worked at KFC. Anthony Tiffith, known as Top Dog, used to go there all the time and sometimes would rob the KFC, but Kendrick's dad didn't want that to happen and, you know, would give them free biscuits and stuff, get on their good side so that they wouldn't rob it when he was there, wouldn't harm him, and the robbery did occur and he killed his dad, then Kendrick would have grown up without a dad and Top Dog would be in prison. Instead, they get to work together. So there's the family ties there, and then the Stunna and Wayne. Stunna, yet another name for Birdman. Drake has an interesting line here where he says, it is fuck the big three, it's just Big D and there's video proof. Talking about the video that leaked of Drake playing with himself. It's an interesting line. I never thought he would be the one to mention that, you know? It's kind of weird. And then Drake gets into the Michael Jackson and Prince thing and says, maybe I'm Prince and you're actually Mike, suggesting that Kendrick wishes he was white or something. Ultimately, the biggest thing to come out of this third verse is the accusation that Kendrick was physically abusive of his fiancée Whitney, which again, this is unsubstantiated. We don't really know if that was true. Kendrick admitted to a lot of awful things on Mr. Morale, including cheating on her. So if he had been physically abusive, part of me thinks he would have admitted that too, or maybe he did and just wasn't ready to admit to it. I don't know. It could just be made up, but it's a big accusation to throw out there. And Drake actually does it too in kind of a funny way where he said, if you put hands on your girl, is it self-defense because she's bigger than you? Again, the short jokes, I know they're childish, but sometimes they're funny.
Your back is up against the curb.
But yeah, so that's Family Matters. It's a great song from Drake. I do really enjoy this one. The problem though was that Kendrick dropped almost immediately after. And when I say almost immediately after, I mean honestly about 30 minutes later. It was frightening. And for Drake to do this whole rollout, right, with a big video and all this stuff, and the Buried Alive interlude flip, clearly this was his big event. This was the main event that he was looking forward to. I mean, he's traveling around filming this video, and for all that work to just be stomped on 30 minutes later, it's extremely demoralizing. If I were Drake, I would be very, very bummed out. Damn, I wanted people to enjoy what I did here, but we didn't have much time to enjoy it because... Okay, here comes the heavy part of the video. There's heavy parts here and there, but now we got to talk about Kendrick's Meet the Grams. It's another 6-minute long song. This one's produced by The Alchemist. Shout out Alchemist. A very dark song though. The way it's structured is that each verse Kendrick is rapping to a different member of Drake's family, the Grams. So the first verse on the song is addressed to his son, Adonis. Now, look, rap beef is always disrespectful, right? To open a song by saying,
Dear Adonis, I'm sorry that man is your father.
That's got to be one of the most disrespectful ways that you could open a song. It's not just mentioning members of Drake's family. He's talking to Drake's son. I'm sorry that Drake is your dad. I look at him and I wish that your grandpa wore a condom. Horrible things to say to, I don't know how old Adonis is. It's crazy. And Kendrick is talking to Adonis like he cares about him. He's like, look, I can mentor you. I can be your mentor. I feel like your father's not doing a good job of raising you. I could do a better job. Get some discipline. Do some push-ups. Don't try to make yourself look fit the way your dad did with Ozempic or BBL or whatever. Like, just do some push-ups. That's what I do. There's videos of Kendrick doing push-ups. Just be a bigger man than your dad. Talk about disrespectful, right? You're saying this to his son. And, he concludes the verse by saying,
Can't understand me right now. Just play this when you 18.
You just have to think of what Adonis's life is going to be like when he's 18 years old or so and he goes back and listens to this song. I don't know if he will. Maybe Drake will not allow him. Maybe he'll have child protections on YouTube so this can never make it to his son. But yeah, it's kind of crazy. Oh boy. Second verse on here begins, Dear Sandra, addressed to Drake's mom. He's talking about, your son's got some problems. And he also addresses Drake's dad, Dennis, and says, you gave him gambling and addiction problems, but he also uses you for credibility. I think he should be paying you more for that. And then, in my opinion, one of the scariest moments on this song, and people might laugh that this is scary, but I really feel like this is where the beef goes to a very dark place. Kendrick says, Sandy, sit down. What I'm about to say is very heavy.
Your son's a sick man with sick thoughts. I think niggas like him should die.
I don't really do reactions. I'm not a very reactive person, but when I heard that line, I was just jaw on the floor. What do I do? What do we do? He just said he thinks Drake should die. Then he talks about, I think, him and Weinstein should get fucked up in a cell for the rest of their life. Like, where is this going? He spends his whole verse talking about how Drake and the people in OVO are predators, grooming people and, trying to normalize things. And he even references the fact that Drake leaked this video of himself trying to normalize sexual behavior. I don't know. It's really dark. And Kendrick starts talking about the industry and how they're weird things going on and people here to police it. And he's telling people like LeBron and Steph Curry, like, keep your family away. Like, anybody who cares about the young girls in your life, don't let them get near Drake. I feel like we kind of had a feeling it was going to go here. I mean, I think Drake did. The way that he used Tupac's voice to say, hey, mention the fact that he likes young girls. It seems like Drake knew it was going to go here. But that's not good. It's not good to have that in your history as hey, this is something people might talk about, because it didn't come out of nowhere, right? I mean, this is based on Drake had sort of a friendly relationship with Millie Bobby Brown and texted her when she was 14 years old. There was something about him maybe taking this girl Bella Harris out on a date when she turned 18. There's pictures of them hanging out when she's younger than that. It's possible that all of this is just circumstantial, really unfortunate. But when it's there and we're in a rap beef of this magnitude, of course Kendrick's going to go there. It's crazy because it's what do you say? How do you respond to these things? One thing I forgot to mention here, when Kendrick talks about Weinstein, he's talking about Harvey Weinstein. If you're not familiar with who that is, he was this Hollywood executive that abused a lot of women, and people coming out against him in Hollywood sort of started the Me Too movement. Right? It's a big movement in terms of women feeling safe or more comfortable in speaking their truths to abuses of power and sexual abuse. And the crazy tie-in for me here is that he's responsible for the Me Too movement, and the Clips song dissing Lil Wayne was called Mr. Me Too. So in a sense, if you're comparing Drake to Harvey Weinstein, you're kind of calling him Mr. Me Too in a whole different sense.
Okay, everybody meet Mr. Me Too.
Kendrick's not drawing that line himself. If I were him, I would have done that. I don't know if maybe he had planned to do that on a different song, but to me the parallel there is just crazy. The next verse was sort of like a bombshell of sorts. You know, it's addressed to Drake's daughter.
Dear baby girl, I'm sorry that your father not active.
Suggesting that he has a daughter that's like 11 years old and that Drake should have been there for her birthday watching Frozen and singing instead of being in Turks, popping perks. Obviously following in the lineage of Pusha T here in terms of saying, you know, you hit a child before, you're hiding another one. Let's bring all these kids to light. They need to know their dad. We don't know, you know, just like the allegations about Kendrick beating his fiance, we don't know if Drake actually has a daughter, and Drake has denied it. This verse doesn't do a whole lot for me. I mean, the shock value lasted maybe just from the beginning to the end of the verse. To me, you know, all the other stuff that's being said on this track is a lot more damning and heavy than suggesting that he has a daughter out there that he doesn't know about. And then the final verse on here is Dear Aubrey. It's addressed to Drake himself, talking about all the problems he has, pill popping, gambling, drinking. It's funny how he starts this because Kendrick's like, truthfully, I didn't have a hating bone in my body. Like, this was just supposed to be a friendly exhibition of rap, but you mentioned my family's name. Again, it's like the same mistake he made, arguably, with the beef against Pusha T. When he name dropped Pusha T's fiance, Pusha took it to a dark place. Drake starts talking about his fiance and his manager, and Kendrick's like, look, you wanted to take it there, we're taking it there. This one kind of rehashes some of the same things from Story of Adidon, where he's talking about Drake's identity and not quite fitting in anywhere, not having secret handshakes with his friends, accusing Drake of all these different lies that he's told over the years. And he closes it by saying,
Fuck a rap battle, this a long life battle with yourself.
I just feel like there are very few people that construct songs as well as he does, and this one is extremely well constructed. The fact that we have each verse addressed to a different member of the family, it's very dark, it's not exactly fun to listen to, but it's really, really good. And I can't say where it would rank in like the all-time diss songs or anything like that, but it's a very heavy one, and I think it absolutely got the job done in terms of completely deflating Drake's rollout with Family Matters. So the last thing I have to mention with Meet the Grams was the cover. This is a picture of some items that supposedly were in Kendrick's possession or somebody's possession that's working to help Kendrick. We got a picture of a Ozempic prescription box with Drake's name on it, suggesting that he's using that medication as well. Receipts showing some extravagant spending because he suggests Drake's got a spending problem. There's a glove that supposedly was taken out of Drake's Maybach. That's also the cover for 616 in LA, just that glove. Again, trying to reinforce this idea that there are supposedly moles on the inside or somebody in Drake's camp that's selling him out. So as if Meet the Grams wasn't enough, Kendrick decides to go back to back, and drop another song the next day called Not Like Us. Before I get into the music with Not Like Us, I gotta talk about the cover because it's a picture of Drake's mansion, his compound, sometimes referred to as the embassy, and it's tagged with all these little silhouettes to suggest that he's harboring sexual predators. I had a feeling the beef was gonna go here, but seeing something like this was like, damn, we really went here. Kendrick's actually going into that. It's still kind of surprising. So where Meet the Grams was very dark, not the kind of song you want to listen to just for fun. Not Like Us is very different. It is produced by DJ Mustard. It is an extremely danceable West Coast type of beat. But as danceable as it is, Kendrick's actually talking about the same stuff. He's still going the predator angle and calling Drake a certified pedophile as a play on Certified Lover Boy. Crazy. Would not have expected that to actually be said, let alone on a track this fun. This is what I'm saying, where Kendrick is very diabolical. Like, who would do something like this? It is unhinged. I have to, again, isolate some lines on here that I really love. He says something about,
I'm finna pass on this body, I'm John Stockton.
John Stockton's an NBA player, very notorious passer, a lot of assists, and who is he assisting as a passer? Karl Malone. Karl Malone infamously impregnated a 13-year-old. Not a good look. Believe it or not, there's a picture out there of Drake hanging out with Karl Malone because I think he was his neighbor or something. It's whatever it is, it's not a great tie-in. There's some lines on here that they're punchy, like saying,
Trying to strike a chord and it's probably A minor.
That's a very punchy line. People want to act like it's brilliant. This is a joke as old as time. I've heard that in many contexts people make that joke. But hearing Kendrick say it on a song, especially a song like this, it does hit different. Now, the title itself, Not Like Us, I know I've talked before about Kendrick drawing these lines between himself and the culture of hip-hop, the us versus Drake. Back on Taylor Made Freestyle, towards the end, Drake is just on mic talking to Kendrick saying,
You better have a motherfucking quintuple entendre on that shit.
Or something I don't even understand. I would say that with Not Like Us, Kendrick gave him that. The title itself, I'm going to argue, is a quintuple entendre. I feel like there are 5 different ways that you can take Not Like Us. The first, I think, and most obvious meaning here is that Drake is an outsider to hip hop culture in Kendrick's eyes. That, you know, the third verse on this song is all about that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But again, I think that the allegations that Drake is...
You're not a rap artist, you're a scam artist with the hopes of being accepted.
You're not really a part of hip hop culture. You're this pop star that just kind of uses us to get to a certain place. The second meaning in Not Like Us, I think, refers here to the allegations of him being some kind of sexual predator, because those are very serious allegations. It's a very serious and very unique kind of crime. And, you know, on this song, Kendrick says, "Hey Drake, I hear you like I'm young.
You better not ever go to cell block 1.
The idea being that when people are sexual predators, there tends to be this notion that if they're in prison, they're going to get treated very differently. People who are in prison for any other assortment of violent crimes, they themselves look down on people who are guilty of sex crimes, because that's just a uniquely terrible thing. You know, Kendrick has talked about violence on some of his other songs too, and it's like,
tell them run to America to imitate heritage. They can't imitate this violence.
It's a different kind of violence, right? It's very different from the sexual violence that he's suggesting here. So in that sense, that would be the second meaning of Not Like Us. The third, I think, goes back into this notion of talking about slavery. Kendrick brings up that slavery notion again on this song. He says,
homie, still double down, calling us some slaves.
Drake is not like Kendrick's Us because he is Canadian and because he talks about slavery flippantly as something that is not part of his heritage. To not have that and talk about it as an outsider, it's kind of distasteful. It's a risky thing to do. The distinction there with slavery and the cultural heritage in America versus Canada, or wherever Drake wants to really put down his roots, if he's going to even claim he's Jamaican or something, I don't know. But the way Drake himself talks about slavery indicates to Kendrick that, no, you're not like Kendrick, and not the us that he's talking about here. The fourth meaning that I would say comes up here is as it pertains to the West Coast versus not just Canada, but anywhere else, right? Towards the end of Euphoria, Kendrick says,
what I learned is niggas don't like the West Coast, and I'm fine with it. I'll push the line with it.
So in one sense, it's like people do not like us, but it's more like you're not like us. With this song, Kendrick employs the help of DJ Mustard, a renowned West Coast beat maker who is, I mean, he's a hit maker. Surprisingly, he hasn't had a #1 hit until this song, but has definitely played a role in defining the new era of the West Coast sound.
Why you drunk off Hennessy? Hope I don't run into my enemies. Got a million things on my mind, executive deals online, limited amount of time.
Kendrick is drawing that line with this West Coast sound because it's like, Drake, this is not something you could do. You couldn't put out a West Coast song like this. It just wouldn't make sense coming from you. This is truly my cultural heritage as Kendrick Lamar, as somebody from Compton. Like, this is what it means to be from the West Coast, and you are not like us. And, you know, that plays into his defense of Tupac. He mentions Tupac again on this song, and Tupac and Snoop Dogg were used on Tailor-Made Freestyle, and Kendrick's just pointing out, like, look, these are like the founding fathers to me. Like, these are the people that are important, but this is something that you wouldn't understand because you're not from LA, you're not from the West Coast.
Some shit I don't even understand, like.
So that, to me, is the fourth Not Like Us. The fifth meaning here, it's more so a reference to how this beef began with the song Like That. So we go from Like That to Not Like Us. And the messaging is similar because on Like That, the whole song is about, are you really like that?
Niggas from the bottom really like that.
For a song directed at Drake, it's like, are you really about that life? Are you really about that lifestyle? Kendrick, I think, is kind of bookending his points here, wrapping back to that with Not Like Us and saying, no, you're not. You're not like us.
They not like us. They not like us. They not like us.
The last thing I want to talk about with this song, the last verse, is really, really special because Kendrick, he starts by talking about Drake doubled down on the slavery thing. And, you know, let me tell you a little story about slavery, that this was the reality in America. Atlanta was the hub for a lot of this. These rich people from outside the city using and exploiting black people in the city. And he says, that's kind of what you're doing, Drake. You know, you come down to Atlanta and you use all these artists to give yourself some credibility, whether that's 21 Savage or Migos. I mean, look at what he's done with those artists throughout his career. Migos and Versace, that was a big thing that he kind of made it like he put Migos on, but they were already kind of popular there. And he's collaborated a lot with 21 Savage, a street rapper, to give Drake that kind of credibility. Future is another big one, obviously. Future's huge in Atlanta. He's one of the biggest rappers to come out of Atlanta in like the last decade or two, whatever. Drake's had a relationship with him, made music with him. And, you know, he concludes this song in this verse by saying,
no, you're not a colleague, you're a fucking colonizer.
That's a crazy thing to say to a person, but that's the way he sees it, is, again, you're not like us. Drake is just utilizing the culture of hip-hop to further his own agenda, which is a very heavy thing to say. But yeah, what a thorough dismantling of Drake with this one. This song goes #1, which is crazy. It might be the first song to go #1 that calls somebody a pedophile. I'm not sure. I'd have to do some more research to confirm, but as far as I know, I think it is. So like maybe a day or two after Not Like Us drops, Drake does respond. Again, to his credit, because I'm glad to see that he's actually still responding in this. Thinking back on the beef with Pusha T, where Pusha drops this devastating track and Drake doesn't even respond to it, it was not a good look. And here he does respond.
The Pulitzer Prize winner is definitely spiraling.
Drake's response track here is titled The Heart Part 6. Kendrick has this series of songs that he's done for a long time, The Heart Parts 1 through 5. Naturally, it makes sense for Drake to derail that. If Kendrick's going to go there with the timestamp series, it makes sense for Drake to go there with a Heart series song. The artwork for this one is a picture of an Instagram comment that Dave Free left on a picture from Kendrick's fiance of, I don't know if it was when she had her child or something. I understand what he's going for, right? He made these allegations that that's Dave Free's kid, and if this is all the evidence you have, it's really not a good look, because Drake is an extremely chronically online individual. All the memes and stuff that he's doing on Instagram, for him to take an Instagram comment of a heart and use that as a suggestion that there's something there, it's so silly, so immature. If he has something more, I feel like he should have told us by now. If that's all he's got, that suggests to me that this might have been fabricated on his end, that he heard a rumor and just ran with it. What does that even mean? You're the manager of an artist, Kendrick Lamar, and his fiance has a baby, and you comment a heart on her picture. That's like the most normal human interaction that I could think of. And Drake's like, not so sure. That could mean something else. It could, but I feel like he's overthinking that one. Anyway, the song itself, basically Drake's saying, hey, I'm not a pedophile. He kind of has to take that angle, right? He kind of has to address the stuff that Kendrick's talking about. But it's interesting because, first of all, this is some of the best rapping he does in the beef, and I'm upset.
You talking about you upset.
The beat is really cool, the flows are great, and it's like, man, I wish he was rapping at this level throughout the beef. He would have maybe had a better time. He saved it here for a track that is largely defensive of him saying, no, I'm not a predator, guys. That's crazy. Kendrick, you have to address the stuff that I brought up.
What about the bones we dug up in that excavation, and why isn't Whitney?
I think that that's in Drake's head because of the way the Pusha T beef went. Pusha T dropped this bombshell about how he had a kid, and Drake was put in a position that he had to respond to the blackface photo. He had to respond to the fact that he had a son. He had to just admit to the world about that stuff.
It's breaking my spirit. Single father, I hate when I hear it.
I think that that's what he's in his head going into this beef. Like, okay, if I come up with something that forces Kendrick to respond to it, then that's how I win, because that's how he lost. But rap beef doesn't really have rules like that. It's not like anybody really has to address these things, especially when they're all rumors. I mean, Kendrick's stuff about Drake having another daughter, that's a rumor. We don't really know the truth of that. Drake addresses that on this song too, saying that he planted that information. I don't know how true that is. It seems convenient for him to say that, and given Drake's personality, if he really did do that, I feel like he would have given us more to show that he did that, right? That would have been a very easy setup to put that information out, and then you could leak text and stuff, because that's something that Drake likes to do. He puts text messages out in the world. I don't know. I don't personally believe that he fed that information. I also don't necessarily believe that the child stuff is true. But when we're talking about rap beef, does the veracity of these claims really matter? I'm not sure. But yeah, Drake addressing the pedophile predator stuff is funny to me, because he says,
let's get to that now. This Epstein angle was the shit I expected.
When I heard that, I said, hang on a minute. Kendrick did not reference Jeffrey Epstein, the guy in charge of the place known as Pedophile Island. Nobody brought up Jeff Epstein, okay? He said Weinstein. He said Harvey Weinstein. It's a different guy. Still a sexual predator, this oppressive guy who abuses power. And I think that that's kind of more of what Kendrick was saying on Meet the Grams, at least, was about that abuse of power and manipulating the minds of these people who are just starstruck, maybe. And that's very much like a Harvey Weinstein thing. But Jeffrey Epstein, very different, very different. So for Drake to go there, for Drake to be the first one to name drop Jeffrey Epstein is crazy. Speaking of crazy, he also name drops Millie Bobby Brown.
Not Millie Bobby Browns, I never looked twice at no teenager.
Again, Kendrick did not mention Millie Bobby Brown. The internet has mentioned Millie Bobby Brown.
I hit Drizzy and told him I had a Millie for him.
Funny for Drake to be the one to mention Jeffrey Epstein. Funny for him to be the one to mention Millie Bobby Brown. Nobody else did. Why are you bringing her up? Because he knows it's inappropriate. Right? He has to. And we don't know if it went any further. We don't know the extent of any of this stuff. If Drake actually is a predator. The one that we do have, there's video of him with like a 17-year-old girl on stage.
17? Why do you look like that?
That one's obviously resurfaced throughout this beef. Some of the people trying to defend it are like, you don't really know what the age of consent there was. Maybe it was 17. It's like, I just want to make this point broadly for anybody. When accusations like this come out of somebody engaging in inappropriate behavior with minors, if you bring up the age of consent, you have lost the argument. How does that work? I mean, if we're talking about Drake behaving inappropriately to someone who's young, even if she's technically of age, it doesn't make the behavior less inappropriate or less creepy. The fact that he was texting Millie Bobby Brown, it's not illegal to be texting her. She's another famous person. I mean, there's nothing illegal about that, but it's inappropriate. That's where our discomfort lies, right? Drake isn't the one who brings up the age of consent. I've seen his fans do that, people on Twitter talking about that. But it's like, if you're having to justify inappropriate behavior by saying, well, it's technically legal, no, it's not a good argument. Not to me, at least. This is how this beef really fizzles out. Drake putting out this song saying, I'm not a predator. There's no way. I'm too famous. I'm too famous to have done any of that stuff. That's maybe the craziest claim on the song, because look at all the famous predators that we've seen their empires crumble because of this stuff. I mean, P. Diddy fled the country recently. Roman Polanski's another big one. He's been out of the United States for a long time because of some awful stuff that he did. Famous people do terrible things, and sometimes they're able to get away with it because they're famous. Remember that YouTuber that put out the ukulele apology video? The whole reason she was able to have inappropriate conversations with minors is because she was famous. That's what enables this thing in the first place. To make the claim that you're too famous to do things like that is just, it's not a good angle to take, Drake. I might be one of the few people on earth that kind of likes the song, again, mostly just for the beat and the flow, the way Drake's rapping. Content, it's not great, and it's definitely a white flag. You know, he ends the song very defeated, talking about,
it is what it is. You definitely got this shit burnt the fuck out, though.
Yeah, Kendrick, you're probably gonna drop like 6 songs in response to this. I kind of don't even want to rap about it anymore. I kind of don't even want to do this anymore. Really funny to hear the progression to that from,
You not as enthused. How are you not in the booth? It feel like you kind of removed.
And I can't leave the Heart Part 6 without talking about the reference to Mother I Sober. So Drake has these lines where he's talking about,
My mom came over today and I was like, Mother I.
oh, it finally clicked. Kendrick, I think the reason you're going for this pedophile angle is because you were abused, you were molested by your cousin. I understand what he's going for here, obviously trying to flip that song from Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, but if you really are paying attention to it, Kendrick is talking about the fact that he was not abused, that he was not molested, and that nobody in his family believed him because they themselves experienced abuse.
I asked my mama why she didn't believe me when I told her no.
I mean, those are exactly the sort of cycles of abuse that Kendrick was trying to unravel and to break on that album. So to hear Drake come out on this song and kind of miss the point really dramatically it's not a good look. We are a bit removed from this beef. As far as I can tell, it doesn't seem like anybody's going to drop anything more. I don't know. It seems to be over, and I think for anybody calling it right, Kendrick won. The Drake fans are in denial of that. The Heart Part 6 was a white flag. I'll give him credit. He put up a pretty good fight. They both gave us some great entertainment. These tracks are tracks that I will probably re-listen to. I think it's a really fun progression to kind of go through and hear all these things in that context, one after the other, and just remind yourself of this era in hip-hop. And of course, before I go, I got to talk a little bit about some Aftermath stuff, because there was a line on Push Ups where Drake told Metro Boomin,
Metro, shut your whole ass up and make some drums, nigga. Yeah.
Drake went on to him because there's beef between them and he produced like that. And it's not like Metro Boomin's gonna record a rap. He's not a rapper. But what he does, he puts out a diss track in beat form, which is really cool. He flips a sample of, again, AI making an appearance in this whole progression here. Somebody on the internet used AI to make a Motown type of song called BBL Drizzy. Metro Boomin took that AI clip and flipped it like a Chipmunk Soul sample and made this BBL Drizzy beat that goes pretty hard. It's extremely catchy. He actually put that out as a song contest saying, everybody submit your raps over this beat. Whoever submits the best one is gonna get a prize of, I don't know if it was $1,000 and a beat from me. Really cool way to handle it as a producer, because now there's thousands of videos out there of up and coming aspiring rappers just talking shit. And whether they're dissing Drake or not, the beat that they're rapping on is dissing Drake. That's pretty crazy. To me, the BBL freestyle from You Know Miles is the best way to conclude all of this, because all he does in this song is just say,
Kendrick Lamar, Drake, Kendrick Lamar, Drake.
I think it just accurately reflects the exhaustion that this kind of put on us. We went from genuinely in the span of just a few days, we were wondering, is Kendrick going to drop anything, to please, is this ever going to end? It felt like we were going to have a Kendrick diss every day for the rest of our lives, that this beef could have just gone on for months and months, who knows how long. I think it'd be really funny if I put this video out and then it's not over and I have to make some more. I'm not going to make more video. If anything else comes out, I feel like I've said my piece. There's talk that Kendrick Lamar is dropping an album this year. I don't know if that's true, but that would be awesome. I think the future looks a little strange for Drake because I just don't know what his next music's going to look like. Leaving aside how long it might be until we get music from him, if he really is trying to take a break from everything, which might be advisable at a time like this. If his next album or song or whatever, if it addresses this stuff, I feel like people might think it's weird and they might pick it apart the same way they did Heart Part 6, because that was a very disliked video on YouTube. People didn't like it. At the same time, if he just goes about making music and doesn't address anything, people might also be upset because it's like, hey, we never really solved some of these things that we're talking about. Because yeah, Drake did address, at least tried to address the Predator stuff. He didn't address any of the stuff about him being a culture vulture, a colonizer. I don't know if he ever will, because that stuff, it's like, how do you even address that? It's all kind of true. Sure enough, while I was editing this video, a new feature from Drake drops. But not just any feature, it's a feature on a Sexy Red song. Especially poignant given what Kendrick said on Euphoria about Drake and Sexy Red.
When I see you stand by Sexy Red, I believe you see two bad bitches.
Anyway, the song is called You My Everything. It's honestly very bad, and Drake's verse is interesting. It's interesting because in the middle of the verse, suddenly the BBL Drizzy beat comes on, and Drake starts rapping to kind of own that term. You know, where Metro and Rick Ross were talking about the fact that he had a BBL. Here, Drake's talking about the fact that he finances BBLs for women.
They need a new body, they hitting me. Hey, BBL Drizzy, they want a new body.
This idea that he's on friendly terms with the surgeon and gets discounts because he sends so many women in for plastic surgery. Yeah, I don't know. This one feels like a very strange thing to flex, especially given the sort of things that Kendrick was saying on Meet the Grams, right? Kendrick accused him of hypersexualizing women, calling him a body shamer, and having money problems. The idea that Drake is out here paying for multiple women to get BBLs, that kind of suggests all three of those. The premise here being that you have an insecure woman that's talking to Drake about her insecurities about her body, and Drake's response, as opposed to saying things like,
head tied, chilling with no makeup on, that's when you're the prettiest. You've been through hell and back, that's why you're bad as fuck, and you know you are. You're a real ass woman, and I like it.
No, he would never say a thing like that anymore. That Drake is the Drake of the past. His response to her now is more along the lines of, let me make that very important decision a little easier for you by offering to pay for it. Then you can get this major cosmetic surgery without as many second thoughts. Yeah, I think it's great that Drake rapped on this BBL Drizzy beat, and I kind of expected him to, because that's very much in his character. But embracing these things that Kendrick said about him is strange to me. And to me, one of the strangest things about this is I've seen people try to argue that Drake is not a body shamer or that he's a feminist, because after all these lines about the BBLs, he tells Sexy Red,
don't even worry about all of that shit, just keep it natural for him, I swear.
But that line doesn't work for me, and the reason is because I have a grasp of something called object permanence. You know, there's a reason that peekaboo is fun for babies, because when you cover your hands, they feel like you disappear. So when Drake here has a line about telling one woman to keep it natural, I think a lot of his fans are like, oh, he must be a feminist. To me, that argument's about as convincing as saying the Grammys aren't racist. They gave John Batiste Album of the Year.
And they ain't even recognize Hov until Annie.
Well, that's the beef in a very big nutshell. I'm sure this is going to be my longest video. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed talking about it. This is a big deal. This is a beef that spans, like I said, really not just to 2013, but beyond that. And 2013 was the year that I really started getting into hip hop to begin with, and I'm a huge fan. I know that it's maybe interesting to have someone like me. I mean, I'm arguably an outsider to hip hop culture too. I recognize that, but I really care about this stuff, and I really try to do my due diligence in talking about it. And I hope that comes through in a video like this, because I had to be thorough. I wanted to try to cover as much as I could. Obviously, there's no way I could possibly talk about or dissect every single line on these tracks. I feel like I'm going to be going back and watching people's reactions to some of these songs for years and years, because every now and then I go back and rewatch reactions to Story of Adidon from some of my favorite creators like John Denton or Sean C. Vibe Villa, shout out to Vibe Villa. I love their reactions to all these songs in the beef. So if you're still into this sort of thing, if you're not feeling too exhausted from the conversation, if you're not really in Miles mode yet, yeah, go watch some other reactions or something, or go listen to these songs again. I feel like some of these will stand the test of time, and they are enjoyable outside of the context and inside the context. But yeah, this is a big event culturally for hip hop, and I'm honored to have the ability to talk to people about it in this way. Thank you all for watching. I'm sure this is a very long video, and I appreciate the fact that you tuned into it. I hope there was at least one or two things in here that maybe you hadn't thought about that I was able to put in your head. At the end of the day, I do like both artists. I do like both Drake and Kendrick Lamar. I think there's a lane for both of them. They both have made albums that I really enjoy, and I hope to just continue to hear great music from both of them in the future. I don't know what it's going to look like from Drake because he definitely lost this beef, but he put up a good fight, and I'm just interested to see where things go after this. So we'll see.